There's something about small towns that people in cities will never understand. It's not the quiet. It's what lives inside the quiet, the way a screen door sounds different at 7 in the morning than it does at noon. The way you can tell who's walking down the street just by the rhythm of their footsteps. I grew up in a place like that. My grandmother used to say that time moves slower in small towns because the good Lord wants us to pay attention. I didn't understand what she meant until I got older. Now I think about it every single day. This story takes place in a town called Millbrook, Vermont. You won't find it on most maps. But if you've ever lived somewhere small, somewhere forgotten, somewhere the mailman knows your name and your troubles, then you already know this place. You already know these people, and maybe, by the end, you'll know yourself a little better too. Eleanor woke at 5:40, same as always. No alarm, no clock radio buzzing her awake. Just her eyes opening in the gray light, her body knowing the hour, the way birds know when to fly south. 72 years of mornings had taught her that much. The floor creaked under her feet as she walked to the kitchen. The same 3 boards, the same 3 sounds, a low groan, a sharp pop, then silence. She'd meant to fix them for 40 years. Never did. Now she couldn't imagine the house without them. The kettle went on. The radio clicked and hummed, searching for its signal before settling into the familiar voice of Paul Harvey. And now, page 2. He was talking about a farmer in Kansas who'd found something in his field. But Eleanor didn't listen to the words. She listened to the sound of them steady, familiar, like an old friend who drops by every morning just to let you know you're not alone. She cut 2 slices of lemon, looked at the second one for a moment, then put it on the saucer anyway. Old habits. Ember lifted his head from his bed in the corner, a faded plaid cushion that had seen better days. Same as both of them. He was 11 now, which made him ancient in dog years. His muzzle had gone white 3 winters ago. His eyes were cloudy, but his tail still worked just fine, and it thumped against the floor twice before he set his chin back down. "Morning, old boy," Eleanor said. The tail thumped once more. That was enough. The bookshop opened at 7, same as always. Eleanor unlocked the door and stepped inside. And the smell wrapped around her like a familiar blanket, lemon oil and old paper and something sweeter underneath. Like vanilla left too long in the sun. 50 years of books breathing in this room, and the walls had soaked up every story. She moved through the aisles with a dust cloth, touching the spines like she was greeting neighbors at church. "Morning, Mr. Twain," she said, straightening a copy of Huckleberry Finn. "Morning, Louisa, you're looking well today." She knew how it sounded, an old woman talking to books in an empty shop. But Eleanor had learned something in her 72 years. Loneliness doesn't come from being alone. It comes from not being seen. And these books, they saw her. They'd been seeing her since she was a girl, with skinned knees and too many questions. Hiding in her father's study while the world went on without her. The books never asked her to be anything other than what she was. That was more than most folks could say. At exactly 6:58, she heard it. Cack, the sound of the mailbox lid on her front porch, metal on metal, quick and sharp. She smiled without meaning to. Sarah was early today. Eleanor stepped onto the porch just as Sarah was turning to go. The girl was tall and thin, all angles and sharp edges like a sketch someone had started but never finished. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, a few strands escaping around her face. Her mailbag hung heavy on her shoulder, pulling her whole body to one side. But it was her shoes that Eleanor noticed first. Canvas sneakers, worn through at the toes, the laces replaced with what looked like twine. Shoes that had walked 1,000 miles and had 1,000 more to go. "Morning. Sarah." The girl turned. "Morning, Mrs." She caught herself. "Morning, Eleanor." It had taken 2 years to get Sarah to stop calling her Mrs. Patterson. 2 years of gentle correction, of please, honey, Mrs. Patterson was my mother-in-law, and bless her heart, she was mean as a snake. Now they were just Eleanor and Sarah, first names, like friends. "You're early today," Eleanor said. "Couldn't sleep." Eleanor looked at her. Really looked. There were shadows under the girl's eyes, darker than usual. And her right hand kept moving to her jacket, touching the inside pocket, then dropping away. She did it 3 times in the space of a breath. "You all right, child?" Sarah's hand froze on her pocket. "I'm fine. It's nothing." She shifted her weight, the mail bag swinging. "I should go. Got the whole route ahead of me. You want some tea before you—" "No, thank you. I really have to." She was already moving, already walking away, her steps quick and uneven on the wooden porch. "I'll see you tomorrow, Eleanor." Eleanor watched her go, watched the way she walked, not rushed, exactly, but waited, like she was carrying something heavier than mail. Ember had come to stand beside her, his nose pushing against her hand. "That girl's carrying something heavy today," Eleanor said quietly. "And I don't mean the mail bag." Ember sighed a long, slow exhale that sounded almost human. "Yeah," Eleanor said. "I reckon so too, old boy." She stood there a moment longer, watching Sarah disappear around the corner. The morning light was coming up gold now, spilling over the rooftops and down into the street. Somewhere a sparrow was singing. Somewhere a car engine turned over. The town was waking up, slow and easy, the way it always did. But Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that something was different today. Something in the air. Something in the way Sarah had touched her pocket, over and over, like she was checking to make sure something precious was still there. "What are you carrying? A child," she thought. And who taught you to carry it alone? She didn't have answers, not yet. But she had time, and tea, and a porch with 2 chairs and a view of the street. In a small town, that was enough to start with. If you're watching from a little town where folks still wave from their porches, I'd love to hear where you're from. As my grandmother used to say, the smallest places hold the biggest hearts. The October wind cut through Sarah's jacket as she turned onto Main Street. Leaves scraped across the sidewalk dry. Brittle sounds that matched the ache in her feet. 3 miles down. 9 to go. Most folks didn't look up when she handed them their mail. A grunt, a nod, sometimes nothing at all. She'd learned not to take it personally. The mail carrier was furniture, part of the background. You didn't thank your doorknob for opening. Mrs. Dorothy was different. The old woman was already waiting on her porch when Sarah came up the walk, wrapped in a housecoat the color of faded roses. 82 years old and still sharp as a tack. "There's my girl." Mrs. Dorothy pressed something into Sarah's palm, a peppermint, still in its cellophane wrapper. "For the road, honey." "Thank you. Mrs. Dorothy, you don't have to—" "Hush, now. You're too skinny. Eat something." Sarah tucked the candy into her pocket, the outside pocket, not the inside one, and kept walking. 3 houses later, she heard him. Well, well, well. Harold Pemberton stood on the corner outside his pharmacy, arms crossed over his chest. His tie was too short burgundy, the kind that came in a gift box at Christmas, and his belly strained against the buttons of his vest. 2 women from the church auxiliary stood nearby, shopping bags in hand. An audience. "3rd time this month," Harold's voice carried. He meant it to. "I don't understand how the post office keeps someone who can't even deliver on time." Sarah's face went hot. "Mr. Pemberton, I'm sorry. The Hendersons' dog got loose and I had to help." "Excuses." He stepped closer. She could smell his aftershave, too much of it. Sharp and chemical. "In my pharmacy, late twice, and you're out. But I reckon standards are different at the post office." One of the churchwomen laughed, quick and high, then covered her mouth. Sarah stared at her shoes. The hole in the left one. The twine holding the right one together. "Harold!" The voice came from behind her. Quiet. Unhurried. Eleanor stood 3 feet away, arms at her sides. "That girl walks 12 miles before you finish your first cup of coffee. Maybe worry about your own 2 feet." She turned and walked back toward the bookshop. The door closed behind her with a soft click. Harold's face went red darker than his tie. Sarah stood frozen on the sidewalk, her hand pressed against her jacket pocket, against the envelope inside. Today was the day. The anniversary, and Eleanor was looking at her through the bookshop window, one hand raised, beckoning her inside. Sarah didn't go inside right away. She stood on the porch, hand still pressed against her jacket, watching Harold retreat toward his pharmacy. His shoulders were stiff, his steps too quick. The church women had already scattered, suddenly very interested in the window display at the hardware store. The bell above the bookshop door chimed. "You coming in or not?" Eleanor's voice drifted out. "Tea's getting cold." Sarah looked down the street. Her route stretched ahead of her 9 more miles of porches and mailboxes and folks who wouldn't look up. 9 more miles of being invisible. She stepped inside. The smell wrapped around her. Lemon oil and old paper and that sweet undertone she could never quite name. Ember lifted his head from his spot by the counter, tail thumping twice against the worn floorboards. "Sit," Eleanor said. It wasn't a suggestion. Sarah sat. The tea was Earl Grey, served in a cup with a chip on the rim. Eleanor settled into the chair across from her, hands wrapped around her own cup, watching, not speaking, just watching. "I'm fine," Sarah said. "Didn't ask." "I know, but you're thinking it." Eleanor took a sip of her tea. "I'm thinking lots of things. Mostly I'm thinking that Harold Pemberton has had a stick up his rear end since 1987 and nothing's going to change that. Bless his heart." Sarah almost smiled. Almost. The clock on the wall ticked. Ember sighed and put his chin back down, outside. A car drove past, slow and steady. Then another sound. Different, heavier, an engine, diesel, getting closer. Both women turned toward the window. A big black car was pulling up to the curb outside the bookshop, one of those fancy rental cars with the sticker in the corner of the windshield. Connecticut plates. The driver's door opened. The man who stepped out was somewhere in his late 60s, maybe older. Tall, with shoulders that had started to curve forward the way they do when a body has carried too much for too long. His jacket was tweed brown and green, worn at the elbows, patched with leather that had gone soft with age. In his hands, he held something close to his chest, a bundle, tied with kitchen twine. Letters. Sarah's hand moved to her own pocket without thinking. The man stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, staring at the bookshop sign. Patterson Books, Est, 1962. His lips moved slightly, like he was reading it to himself, or maybe praying. Then he squared his shoulders the way a man does when he's gathering courage and walked toward the door. The passenger door opened. A younger man climbed out, 30-something. Sharp jaw, hair cut short and neat. He had a phone pressed to his ear, his voice carrying through the morning air. "No. I understand the deadline. I'm telling you the filing can wait until—" He paused, listened. His jaw tightened. "Fine, fine. I'll call you back." He ended the call and shoved the phone into his pocket. His eyes swept the street, the bookshop, the porch where Sarah had been sitting. He didn't really see any of it. "Papa." His voice was tight. "Let's just get this over with." The older man didn't answer. He was already at the door. The bell chimed. Ember's tail thumped once, then stopped. The old dog lifted his nose, sniffing the air, reading the stranger the way dogs do. "Good morning." The man's English was good, but the accent underneath was unmistakable. Italian, the vowels soft, the consonants rolling. "I am looking for someone who can read Italian. Old Italian." Eleanor's eyebrows rose. "Well, I'll be." "That's an unusual request for a Tuesday morning." "It is an unusual situation." He held up the bundle of letters. The paper was yellow with age, the edges soft and worn. Sarah could see stamps on some of the envelopes, faded images of the Colosseum, the kind they stopped making decades ago. "These are from my mother. She passed last year. I kept them in a box for a long time. I never read them properly. Never read them. She wrote in the old way, the way her mother taught her, Tuscan dialect, from the hills." He shook his head slowly. "I left Italy when I was young. I forgot more than I remembered." The younger man appeared in the doorway. He didn't come all the way in, just leaned against the frame, arms crossed, checking his watch. "We've been to 3 places already," he said. "A university in Hartford, a translation service in Boston. Nobody can read it. It's very old," the older man said. "The words are different, not like modern Italian." Eleanor held out her hand. "May I?" He hesitated, just for a second. His fingers tightened on the bundle, and something flickered across his face, the same look Sarah had seen on her own face in the mirror, holding her own envelope, the fear of letting go. Then he placed the letters in Eleanor's palm. She untied the twine carefully. "The way you handle something that matters." The top envelope came open easily. The glue had given up decades ago. She pulled out the letter inside and unfolded it. Sarah watched Eleanor's eyes move across the page, watched her lips press together, watched her shoulders drop, just slightly. "I'm sorry," Eleanor said. She folded the letter and slid it back into the envelope. "I took Italian in college, a long time ago, but this isn't textbook Italian. These words." She shook her head. "I can pick out a few things, but not enough. Not nearly enough." The older man's hands closed around the bundle as she passed it back. His knuckles were white. "Then, perhaps," he said quietly, "her voice will stay silent forever." The younger man checked his watch again. "Papa, our flight's at 6 tomorrow. We should, Luca." One word, soft but final. The younger man, Luca, closed his mouth. His jaw worked, but he didn't speak. Nobody spoke. The clock ticked. Ember's tail lay still. The old man stood in the middle of the bookshop, holding his mother's words in his hands, unable to read them. Sarah's fingers were trembling. She didn't know when she'd stood up, didn't remember pushing back her chair. But she was standing now, and her eyes were fixed on the bundle in the old man's hands, on the stamps, on the faded ink, on the handwriting. It was slanted, leaning to the right. The letters looped and curled in ways that modern Italian didn't use anymore. She'd seen writing like that before, in books, in old recordings from the library, in the cramped notebooks of Maria Benedetto, the woman in Boston who'd grown up in the hills outside Montepulciano, in her mother's letters. Her hand was still pressed against her jacket pocket, against the envelope inside, the envelope she'd carried for 13 years. The old man looked up. His eyes met hers. Sarah's lips parted, closed, parted again. She knew those words. She knew that handwriting. She'd spent 10 years learning to read it from books, from cassette tapes, from an 80-year-old woman who charged her nothing but company and cups of bitter coffee. She could read those letters. The question was whether she could say it out loud. The envelope slipped from the bundle as the old man shifted his grip. It fell slowly, or maybe time just stretched the way it does in moments that matter. The paper turned once in the air, caught the light from the window, and landed face up on the wooden floor. Sarah bent down before she could think about it. Her fingers closed around the envelope. She started to stand, to hand it back. Then she saw the handwriting, slanted right, loops that curled back on themselves, the letter G with that distinctive tail sweeping down, then hooking sharply left. She'd seen that style 1,000 times, in old books from the library, in photographs of documents from the old country, in the cramped notebooks of Maria Benedetto, the woman in Boston who'd taught her to read the language of her mother's childhood. Her lips moved without permission. Cara figlia mia. The words formed silently, automatically, the way a hymn comes back to you after 20 years away from church. Child. Eleanor's voice. Close. Careful. Sarah looked up, found the old woman watching her with those sharp eyes that missed nothing. Can you read that? The question hung in the air. The old man Marco, his son had called him, stood frozen with his bundle of letters pressed against his chest. Luca had straightened in the doorway, phone forgotten in his hand. Sarah's throat tightened. Her heart was beating too fast, too hard, pushing against her ribs like something trying to escape. She could lie. She could hand back the envelope and walk out the door and finish her route and never see these folks again. That would be the safe thing, the easy thing, but the handwriting was looking up at her from the yellowed paper, and somewhere inside her jacket, pressed against her heart, another letter waited. Had been waiting for 13 years. It says, her voice came out rough. She cleared her throat. It says, my dear daughter. Marco made a sound. Not quite a word. Not quite a breath. Something in between. That's what Mama called my sister. His voice had gone thin, papery. Figlia mia, my daughter. He took a step closer. You understand this? These old words. Sarah nodded. Her hand was shaking. She pressed the envelope against her leg to hide it. Should I? She couldn't finish the question. Please. Marco's eyes were wet. Please. Sarah looked at Eleanor. The old woman gave a small nod. Just once. That was enough. She unfolded the letter. The paper was soft with age. The creases worn almost transparent where it had been folded and refolded over the years, and the ink had faded from black to brown, but the words were still clear, still waiting. Sarah took a breath, let it out slowly, and began to read. Cara figlia mia. The words came out different than she expected. Not her voice, not the quiet, apologetic voice she used on her mail route. This was something older, deeper, a voice she'd learned from cassette tapes and Sunday afternoons in Maria Benedetto's kitchen. Listening to the old woman tell stories about a village in the hills where the olive trees grew wild and the church bells rang every evening at 6. My dear child, the figs are ripe this year. I saved the best ones for you, in the blue bowl on the kitchen table. But you are not here to eat them. Marco's hand found the back of the nearest chair. His knuckles went white. So I eat them alone, and I pretend you are sitting across from me, laughing at how the juice runs down my chin. Sarah paused, swallowed. The next line was harder. Your father says I am foolish. He says you are busy, that America is far away, that we should be grateful you call once a month. He is right about all of these things, but he is wrong, too, because a mother's heart does not understand distance. It only understands absence. The clock ticked. Ember shifted on his bed, tags jingling softly. Somewhere outside. A car passed by, its engine fading into the morning quiet. I walked to the market yesterday. Do you remember the market? The old man who sold chestnuts is gone now. His son has taken over. The son does not roast them the same way, but I buy them anyway, because the smell reminds me of you, of walking through the square with you on my hip, your small fingers reaching for everything, your laugh filling up the whole piazza. Marco sat down heavily in the chair. His legs had simply stopped holding him. Luca had stepped fully into the shop now. His phone was in his pocket. His arms hung at his sides. He was staring at Sarah like he'd never seen a person before, like she'd appeared out of thin air, speaking in tongues. I am getting old. Figlia mia. My hands shake when I write now. See how the letters wobble. Your father pretends not to notice. He pretends about many things these days. But I notice. I notice everything. Sarah's own hands were trembling. She gripped the letter tighter. I notice that the house is too quiet. I notice that the chair across from me at dinner is always empty. I notice that when the phone rings, I run to answer it, even though my knees hurt and the doctor says I should rest, because maybe this time it will be you. She stopped reading. The silence in the bookshop was complete. Even the clock seemed to have paused. Holding its breath, Marco was bent forward in his chair, his face hidden in his hands. His shoulders were shaking small, silent tremors that spoke louder than any sound. Luca stood 3 feet from his father. His jaw was clenched. His eyes were fixed on the old man's bent back. He looked like he wanted to move closer, but had forgotten how. Eleanor hadn't moved from her spot by the counter. Her hand rested on Ember's head, fingers moving slowly through his fur. Sarah looked down at the letter. There was more words, more memories, more longing pressed into faded ink. But her throat had closed up. Her eyes were burning. She knew this feeling. She'd felt it every time she'd tried to read her own mother's letters, that wall that comes up when the words get too close, when they start to cut. There's more, she said. Her voice was barely a whisper. Do you want me to? Marco lifted his head. His face was wet. His eyes were red-rimmed and swollen, but he was nodding like a man dying of thirst being offered water. All of them. His voice cracked. Can you read all of them? Sarah looked at the bundle in his lap. 20 letters, maybe 30. 40 years of a mother's love, tied up with kitchen twine. She looked at the clock. Her route wasn't finished. The mail wasn't delivered. Harold Pemberton would have something to say about that. She looked at Eleanor. The old woman just smiled, small and sad and knowing. I'll tell you what, Eleanor said softly. The letters can wait. They always do. Sarah sat down in the chair beside Marco. She reached for the next envelope. But, before she opened it, she felt it again, that weight in her jacket pocket. That other letter, the one she'd carried for 13 years. The one she'd never had the courage to read. Her mother's last words, waiting. The second letter was dated 3 weeks after the first. Sarah's fingers found the familiar rhythm slide the paper from the envelope, unfold along the creases, smooth the edges flat. The ink was darker in this one, fresher. The mother had been having a good day when she wrote it. The tomatoes came in yesterday, Sarah read. Do you remember how your father used to complain about the tomatoes too many, always too many? Now he eats them for breakfast, lunch, and supper. He pretends to complain still, but I see him in the garden at dawn, checking the vines like a new father checks his sleeping baby. Marco made a sound that might have been a laugh, or might have been something else. The church bells are broken again. Father Gianni says the diocese has no money to fix them, so the women of the village have started a collection. Your Aunt Rosa gave €3. She wanted everyone to know she gave €3. Some things never change. Figlia mia. Eleanor had moved to the small kitchen behind the counter. Sarah heard water running, the click of the stove, the quiet clink of cups being set on saucers, the sounds of someone making tea, because there was nothing else to do. The third letter, the fourth, the fifth. Each one a window into a life Sarah had never seen but somehow recognized. The rhythm of seasons in a village where time moved differently. The neighbor's cat that kept stealing fish from the kitchen window. The new road they were building that would bring tourists but also noise. The old olive tree in the back garden that finally stopped producing after 67 years. I sat under that tree the day your father proposed. Sarah read. Did I ever tell you that he was so nervous he dropped the ring in the grass? We searched for an hour. When we finally found it, I said yes before he could ask. I reckon I surprised us both." Marco's head was bowed. His hands gripped his knees. He hadn't spoken in a long while. Luca had moved from the doorway to the window. He stood with his back to the room, staring out at the street. His reflection in the glass showed nothing. Just a shape, a silhouette, the 6th letter, the 7th. Sarah's voice had grown hoarse. Eleanor appeared beside her and pressed a cup of tea into her hands. The cup was warm, the steam rising with the smell of bergamot and lemon. She drank without tasting it, set the cup down, picked up the next envelope. This one was different. The paper was thinner, cheaper, the handwriting less steady, the letters cramped together like they were trying to save space, like the writer had been trying to fit too many words onto a single page. The date at the top made Sarah's breath catch. December 24th, 2003. "Christmas Eve," she read. "Your father set the table for 3. Marco's shoulders tensed. "I told him you are busy. Important work." He nodded. He did not ask questions. He never asked the questions anymore. "Your father—" The clock ticked. Ember shifted on his bed, tags jingling softly. Outside, the wind pushed against the windows, and somewhere down the street, someone was playing Christmas music faint, tinny, like it was coming from an old radio. We ate in silence. The focaccia got cold. I made it the way you like, extra rosemary. A little honey in the dough. Remember how you used to eat half the loaf before supper was ready? Your father would scold you, and I would pretend to scold you. But we both knew I made extra just so you could—" Sarah's hands were trembling. She gripped the paper tighter. "I saved your portion. In the blue bowl, on the counter, covered with the cloth your grandmother embroidered. In case you come, in case the phone rings and you say, 'Mama, I'm at the airport. I'm on my way.'" Marco made a sound. Low, broken, like something cracking open inside him. "The food got cold, but I didn't throw it away. Maybe tomorrow. Maybe tomorrow you will come." Sarah stopped reading. The silence that followed was the loudest thing she'd ever heard. Marco sat bent forward in his chair, his hands covering his face. His shoulders were shaking, not dramatically, not obviously, but with small, tight tremors. Like something inside him was trying to break free and he was using every ounce of strength to hold it in. Luca had turned from the window. He stood 3 feet from his father, arms hanging at his sides. His jaw was clenched so tight Sarah could see the muscle jumping beneath his skin. He looked like he wanted to move, like he wanted to cross those 3 feet and put his hand on his father's shoulder and say something, anything, but his feet stayed planted, his arms stayed down. "Papa!" His voice came out rough, cracked. "You never told me. What was there to tell?" Marco didn't lift his head. His words were muffled by his hands. "That I was a fool, that I chose work over her, over everything. Papa! 40 years of letters, Luca, 40 years, and I kept them in a box in the closet. I told myself I would read them later, when I had time, when things were less busy." He laughed. It was not a happy sound. There is always later, until there isn't. Eleanor set a cup of tea on the small table beside Marco's chair. She didn't say anything, just placed it there and stepped back, her hand briefly touching his shoulder, a pat, gentle, the way you'd comfort a child who'd scraped his knee. Marco lowered his hands. His face was wet, his eyes red and swollen. He looked at the cup, then at Eleanor. "Thank you," he said. His voice was barely a whisper. "Drink it while it's hot, honey." Eleanor's voice was gentle but firm. Tea doesn't fix anything, but it gives your hands something to do while the heart catches up. He picked up the cup. His hands shook so badly that the tea sloshed against the rim. But he drank. 1 sip, 2. Luca took a step forward, then another. He was beside his father's chair now, close enough to touch. He didn't touch, but he didn't move away either. "Papa." His voice was different now, softer, younger somehow. "I didn't know. About the letters. About any of it. Of course you didn't know." Marco looked up at his son. "I never told you. I never told anyone. I just kept moving, working, building, telling myself that if I built enough, achieved enough, it would mean something, that she would understand." She did understand. Sarah heard herself speak before she knew she was going to. Both men turned to look at her. The letters, they're not angry. They're not bitter. She wasn't writing to punish you. She was writing to keep you close. Marco stared at her. His eyes were searching her face, looking for something. "How do you know?" he asked. "How can you know that—" Sarah's hand moved to her jacket pocket, pressed against the envelope inside. "Because that's what mothers do," she said. "They write, they wait, they keep a place at the table, even when they know no one's coming." The words hung in the air between them. Eleanor was watching her. Sarah could feel those sharp eyes, seeing more than she wanted to show. "There are more letters," Sarah said quickly. She reached for the next envelope. "Should I wait?" Luca's voice, sharp, curious. He had stepped away from his father's chair and was looking at Sarah now, really looking, the way someone looks when they've just noticed something that doesn't add up. "Where did you learn this?" he asked. "This language, this dialect. They told us in Boston that maybe a dozen folks in America can read it fluently. Scholars? Professors?" His eyes narrowed. "You're a mail carrier." The words weren't cruel, just confused, just trying to make sense of something that didn't fit. Sarah's mouth went dry. "It's a long story," she said. "We have time." Luca glanced at his father, then back at her. "Our flight isn't until tomorrow." Eleanor cleared her throat. "Luca, maybe this isn't—" "No." Sarah held up her hand. "It's okay. It's a fair question." She looked down at the letter in her lap, at the cramped handwriting, at the faded ink. Then she looked at Marco. "My mother was from Montepulciano," she said. "She came here when she was 20, married a farmer, never went back." The words settled into the room like dust after a storm. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Even Ember had gone still on his bed, his cloudy eyes fixed on Sarah like he understood something the humans hadn't figured out yet. Sarah stared at the floor, at the worn planks, the scratches in the wood, the faded pattern of footsteps where customers had walked for 60 years, anywhere but at the faces watching her. "Your mother was from Montepulciano." Marco's voice was soft, careful. "And she left letters." "Not at first." Sarah's throat felt tight. "She wrote to her sister in Italy. Every week, sometimes more, and she kept copies, dozens of them. In a tin box under her bed. I found them after she died." The tin box. She could see it now, dented at the corners, the lid painted with faded roses. A clasp that stuck unless you knew to press and lift at the same time. Her mother had kept it hidden under old quilts and winter blankets, in the space between the bed frame and the wall. Sarah had found it 3 days after the funeral. She'd been looking for something, anything that still smelled like her mother. The quilts had lost the scent of lavender soap by then, but the box had held it. That smell had hit her like a fist when she lifted the lid. "The letters were all in Tuscan," she said. "The old dialect. The way my mother's grandmother used to write. I could recognize some words from hearing Mama speak, but reading them—" She shook her head. "It was like looking at a locked door. I could see it was a door. I just couldn't open it." Luca had moved closer. He was leaning against the bookshelf now, arms still crossed, but his posture had softened. The sharpness in his eyes had faded into something else, something that looked almost like recognition. "So, you learned," he said. "You taught yourself to read a dead language just to understand letters your mother wrote. I tried to teach myself. The first 2 years I barely made progress." Sarah's hands were in her lap now, fingers twisted together. I'd sit in the library for hours, trying to match words to sounds, sounds to meanings. It was like learning to walk again after forgetting how. I'd copy pages from old books, listen to scratchy recordings on cassette tapes, anything I could find. Most nights I'd fall asleep at the kitchen table with the dictionary open and wake up with ink on my cheek. What changed? Eleanor's voice came from behind the counter. She hadn't moved from her spot by the tea service, but her eyes were fixed on Sarah. Maria Benedito. The name came out like a prayer. She was 83 when I found her, living in a third-floor walk-up in the north end of Boston. Her granddaughter had put up a notice at the Italian Cultural Center, something about looking for folks who wanted to learn the old Tuscan dialects. Sarah remembered the stairs. 4 flights, narrow and steep, the handrail worn smooth by generations of hands, the smell of garlic and wood smoke and something sweet baking in a kitchen somewhere below. Maria's grandmother came from the same region as my mother's family, different villages, but the same hills, the same words. Sarah swallowed. She taught me for free, every Sunday for 6 years. I'd take the bus to Boston and sit in her kitchen and listen to her talk. Sometimes she'd tell stories about the old country. Sometimes she'd just read from old books, prayer books, recipe collections, letters her own mother had written, and I'd listen. I'd write down every word I didn't know and look it up later. Marco was watching her with an expression she couldn't read. His tea sat untouched on the table beside him, growing cold. Maria passed 4 years ago, Sarah said, but by then I could read. I could finally read. The clock ticked. Outside, a car drove past, the ordinary sounds of an ordinary morning in a town where nothing ever happened. "And your mother's letters?" Marco asked. "Did you read them?" Sarah's hand moved to her jacket pocket. She didn't mean for it to. The gesture was automatic, protective, the way you touch a wound to check if it's still bleeding. All of them except one. The words came out barely louder than a whisper. Eleanor straightened behind the counter. Marco leaned forward in his chair. Even Luca uncrossed his arms. "One letter," Sarah continued. Her fingers pressed against the envelope through the fabric of her jacket. She could feel its edges, softened by years of carrying. The last one she ever wrote. She wrote it the morning she died, before she got in the car, before she... Her voice broke. She stopped, breathed, started again. I found it on her desk after... Sealed. Addressed to her sister in Italy. She must have been planning to mail it that afternoon. "But you kept it," Eleanor said, not a question. "I kept it." Sarah's fingers curled around the shape of the envelope. 13 years. I've read every other letter she wrote. Hundreds of them. But this one... She couldn't finish. Couldn't find the words to explain what she'd never been able to explain to anyone. The weight of that envelope. The way it felt heavier than paper and ink should feel. The terror that came every time she thought about opening it. "You're afraid," Marco said quietly. "Afraid of what it says." Sarah shook her head. "No, I'm afraid of what happens after." She looked up, met his eyes. "As long as that letter is sealed, she still has something to say to me, something I haven't heard yet. But once I read it..." Her throat tightened. "Once I read it, there's nothing left. No more words, no more voice. Just silence." The bookshop was very quiet. Marco was staring at her with tears running down his face. He wasn't wiping them away, wasn't trying to hide them. "Lord, have mercy," Eleanor said softly, almost to herself. "I understand now." "I understand too," Marco said. His voice was rough, scraped, raw. "I understand exactly." Luca made a sound something between a breath and a word. He was looking at his father now, not at Sarah, looking at him like he was seeing something for the first time. "Today is the anniversary." Sarah heard herself say, 13 years ago today, October 23rd. She reached into her jacket. Her fingers found the envelope. Pulled it out. The paper was yellowed at the edges, the corners soft and rounded from being handled so many times. There was a water stain in one corner from a day 5 years ago when Sarah had been caught in the rain and hadn't zipped her jacket all the way. The ink of her mother's handwriting had blurred slightly there, but the words were still readable. Chiara Benedetto. That was her mother's sister's name. The address below it was in Italy somewhere, a village Sarah had never visited, never seen except in photographs her mother kept in the tin box. "I was going to read it today," she said. "After my route, I was going to go to her grave and sit there and finally," she stopped. Finally what? Finally let go, finally say goodbye, finally accept that her mother was gone and had been gone for 13 years and wasn't coming back. No matter how many letters Sarah learned to read, Eleanor had come around the counter. She stood a few feet away, close enough to touch, but not touching. "Sweetheart," she said softly. "Were you going to read it alone?" Sarah looked at the envelope in her hands, at the familiar handwriting, at the faded stamp in the corner, a stamp her mother had placed there 13 years ago, on a morning when she'd been alive and whole, and had no idea she wouldn't make it to the end of the day. "I've always done everything alone," Sarah said. That's how it's always been." "Well, now," Eleanor said, her voice gentle but firm. "That's how it was. Doesn't have to be how it stays." Marco rose from his chair. His legs were unsteady, but he stood. He crossed the small space between them and stopped in front of Sarah. "You gave me my mother's voice," he said. "Let us be here when you hear yours." Sarah's hands tightened on the envelope. Her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her teeth. She looked at Eleanor, at Luca, still standing by the bookshelf with that strange expression on his face. At Marco, with his wet eyes and his shaking hands and his bundle of letters he'd carried across 3 states looking for someone who could read them. Strangers, all of them. Folks she'd met an hour ago. Folks who had no reason to care about a mail carrier with worn-out shoes and a letter she was too scared to open. But they were here, and they were waiting, and for the first time in 13 years. Sarah wasn't sure she wanted to do this alone. Her fingers found the edge of the envelope flap. The glue had long since dried out. It would open easily now, without resistance. "I don't know if I can," she whispered. Eleanor's hand settled on her shoulder, warm, steady. "Only one way to find out. Child." Sarah's fingers wouldn't stop shaking. She'd slid her nail under the envelope flap the glue had turned to powder years ago, but now she couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The paper trembled in her hands like a living thing. "Take your time," Eleanor said. But that was the problem. She'd been taking her time for 13 years. 13 years of carrying this envelope in a tin box under her bed, then in her nightstand drawer, then in her jacket pocket on days like today when she told herself she was finally ready. She was never ready. The flap came open with a soft, tearing sound. The paper inside was folded twice. She could feel the creases through the envelope. Her mother had always folded her letters the same way, top third down, bottom third up. Neat, precise, the way she did everything. Sarah pulled the letter out. The paper was thinner than she remembered, almost see-through in the light from the window. She could see the shadow of words through it, backward and illegible, like a secret waiting to be told. Her hands were sweating now. The paper was going to get wet. She was going to ruin it. 13 years of keeping it safe, and she was going to destroy it with her own stupid, trembling hands. "Here." Eleanor pressed a cloth napkin into her palm. "Dry your hands first." Sarah wiped her palms, set the napkin aside, picked up the letter again. The room was silent. Marco had returned to his chair. Luca stood by the window, his reflection a dark shape against the morning light. Ember had lifted his head from his bed, watching with those cloudy eyes that seemed to see more than they should. Sarah unfolded the letter, Her mother's handwriting looked back at her, familiar, achingly familiar. The slant to the right, the loops that curled back on themselves, the way she dotted her I's with tiny circles instead of points. Sarah had inherited that habit. She hadn't realized it until years after her mother died. The date at the top made her stomach clench. October 23rd, 2010, 7:14 a.m. Her mother had written the time. She never wrote the time. But on this morning, this last morning she had. Sarah's throat closed. Her eyes burned. She couldn't do this. She wasn't strong enough. She was going to fall apart in front of these strangers, and they would see her, really see her, and she couldn't bear it. Read it out loud. Marco's voice was gentle. That's the only way. I can't. You can. You read my mother's words to me. Now, let me hear yours. Sarah looked at him, at his red-rimmed eyes, his tear-streaked face, the way his hands still trembled from the weight of letters he should have read decades ago. He knew. He understood in a way that no one else ever had. She took a breath, let it out, took another, and began to read. My little bird. The words came out cracked, broken, nothing like the voice she'd used for Marco's letters. This was different. This was hers. My little bird. It is early, and the house is quiet. Your father left for the fields an hour ago. I can hear the tractor in the distance, that familiar rumble that used to wake you up when you were small. Do you remember? You would come padding into our room in your nightgown, rubbing your eyes, asking why Papa had to make so much noise so early. Sarah's voice broke. She stopped, pressed her hand against her mouth. The tractor. She remembered the tractor, the way it sounded like thunder rolling across the farm, the way her father would come in at noon smelling of diesel and earth, the way her mother would scold him for tracking mud across the kitchen floor while secretly smiling. The kitchen floor that Sarah had stood on 3 days after the funeral, alone, staring at a crack in the linoleum that she'd never noticed before. Keep going, Eleanor said softly. Don't stop now, child. Sarah lowered her hand, found her place on the page. Today is your big day. Your play. You have been practicing for weeks, I hear you in your room at night. Saying your lines over and over. You think I don't know? But I know everything. That is what mothers do. A sound escaped Sarah's throat. Not a word, not a cry, something in between. I am so proud of you. I know I don't say it enough. I know I am hard on you sometimes, too hard. Your father says, but it is only because I see so much in you, so much that you don't see in yourself. And I am afraid that if I don't push you, you will never know what you're capable of. The words were blurring now. Sarah blinked, and tears fell onto the paper, dark spots spreading across the ink. She was ruining it, ruining the last thing her mother had ever written. She didn't care. You worry too much. Piccola mia, you always have. You worry about being late, about not being good enough, about disappointing people, but you could never disappoint me. Don't you understand that you have never not once disappointed me? Sarah's legs gave out. She didn't fall. Eleanor caught her, guided her into a chair, but her body had simply stopped working. Her knees buckled. Her hands dropped the letter. It fluttered to the floor and lay there, face up, the words still visible. I wasn't there. The words tore out of her, raw, ugly. She was coming to see me, and I wasn't. I was backstage putting on makeup, and she was dying on the highway, and I didn't even know. Sarah, I didn't even know until after. The show went on. I said my lines. I smiled and bowed, and everyone clapped, and the whole time she was already. Sarah. Eleanor's hands were on her shoulders, firm and steady. Look at me. Sarah looked up. Her face was wet. Her nose was running. She could feel snot on her upper lip, could feel the tears dripping off her chin, could feel how pathetic she must look, a grown woman falling apart over a letter, falling apart in front of strangers, falling apart the way she'd promised herself she would never do again. She'd sworn. After the funeral. After the months of crying herself to sleep. After the pitying looks and the casseroles and the folks who kept saying, "I'm so sorry for your loss," like the words meant anything, she'd sworn she would never let anyone see her like this again. And here she was, snot-faced and shaking in a bookshop, surrounded by people she'd met 2 hours ago. A mess. A complete and utter mess. "The letter!" she gasped. "I dropped it. I have it." Luca's voice. He was kneeling beside her chair, the paper in his hands. He held it carefully, reverently, the way you hold something sacred. "There's more to... Do you want me to know?" Sarah reached for it. Her hands were still shaking, her vision still blurred, but she needed to finish. She needed to hear the rest. "Give it to me." Luca placed the letter in her palm. Sarah wiped her face with the back of her hand, wiped her nose on her sleeve like a child. She didn't care how it looked, didn't care about dignity or composure or any of the walls she'd spent 13 years building. The walls were down. They'd been down since she walked into this bookshop. She found her place on the page. The ink had smeared where her tears had fallen, but the words were still readable. "Don't rush, piccola mia." Her voice was barely a whisper now. "You are always rushing, running from one thing to the next like you're afraid you'll miss something, but the only thing you can miss is the moment you're in." She paused, breathed, continued. "I will be at your play tonight, front row, where I always sit, and when you come on stage, look for me. I will be the one crying before you even say your first line." A sound escaped her, half laugh, half sob. "I love you, my little bird, more than you know, more than I can say, more than these words on this paper." One line left. Sarah could see it at the bottom of the page, the last thing her mother had ever written. "Mama will be there. Mama is always there." The letter fell from her hands. Ember had gotten up from his bed. He crossed the room on stiff legs and laid down at Sarah's feet, pressing his warm body against her ankles. His tail didn't wag. He just lay there, solid and present, like he knew she needed something to hold on to. Eleanor was beside her. Marco was beside her. Even Luca had moved closer, his hand hovering near her shoulder like he wasn't sure if he should touch her or not. Sarah sat in the chair, surrounded by strangers who had become something else, and let herself cry. Not the quiet tears she allowed herself on anniversaries. Not the controlled grief she performed at the cemetery. This was different. This was 13 years of silence breaking open. This was every night she'd lain awake wondering what her mother had wanted to tell her. This was the weight of a letter she'd been too afraid to read. Finally lifted, and hurt. It hurt worse than she'd imagined. But underneath the pain, there was something else. Relief. She didn't know how long she sat there, long enough for the light from the window to shift, long enough for her tears to slow and her breathing to steady, long enough for Ember to fall asleep against her feet, his gentle snoring the only sound in the room. When she finally looked up, Marco was watching her. "She was there," he said quietly. "At your play. She was already there." Sarah stared at him. "What?" "Think about it." He leaned forward in his chair. "She wrote this letter in the morning. She was coming to mail it, then go to your school. But she never mailed it, which means..." Sarah's heart stopped. "Which means she was already on her way to you when it happened. She was coming early, to get a good seat." Marco's eyes were wet again. "She was always there, Sarah. She never missed a moment." The light through this window had shifted from gold to white. Morning becoming noon. Sarah sat in the chair. Her mother's letter folded in her lap, her face still damp. She'd stopped crying, but her body hadn't caught up yet. Her breath still hitched occasionally. Her hands still trembled when she moved them. Ember had fallen asleep against her feet. His warmth was steady, grounding, the only thing that felt real in a world that had tilted sideways. Marco rose from his chair. His movements were slow, careful, like a man testing his legs after a long illness. He crossed to where Sarah sat and stood before her. "I have to go," he said. "Our flight. Luca's work." He shook his head. "There is always work." Sarah nodded. She understood. The world didn't stop for grief. It kept turning, kept demanding, kept pulling you back to the surface whether you were ready or not. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was hoarse, scraped raw. "For staying. You didn't have to. Neither did you." Marco reached into the pocket of his tweed jacket. His fingers emerged holding an envelope, white, clean, unsealed. "This is for you." Sarah took it without thinking. The paper was heavier than she expected, expensive, the kind of stationery you bought for important letters. "Don't open it now," Marco said. "Wait until you're ready. Until—" He paused, searching for words. "Until the day feels right." "What is it?" Marco smiled. The first real smile she'd seen from him, small and sad, but genuine. "In my village, they say that the best gifts come from folks who don't know they're giving." He touched the envelope in her hands. "You gave me my mother's voice. I can never repay that. But this is a beginning." Luca appeared beside his father. He'd been standing by the window, silent for the past hour, watching, processing. His face was different now. The sharpness softened, the impatience gone. "I owe you an apology," he said. Sarah looked up. "For what?" "For looking at my phone while you were reading. For checking my watch. For—" he stopped, swallowed. "For missing the point. All of it." His hand moved toward her shoulder, hesitated, then dropped back to his side. "Thank you for helping me see him. Really see him." The words hung in the air between them. Sarah didn't know what to say. Didn't know if there was anything to say, so she just nodded, and Luca nodded back, and somehow that was enough. Marco turned to Eleanor, who had been watching from behind the counter, quiet and still. "You have a beautiful shop," he said. "My mother would have loved it. She was a reader, always reading. She used to say that books were the only friends who never let her down." Eleanor's mouth curved. Smart woman. The smartest. Marco looked around the room one more time at the shelves of books, at the sleeping dog, at the girl with the tear-stained face holding 2 letters now instead of 1. This place feels like her, like home. And he walked to the door. Luca followed. But at the threshold, Marco paused and turned back. "Sarah." She looked up. "Your mother was right. You don't have to rush." He touched his chest, where his bundle of letters rested in his inside pocket. "The important things will wait. They always do." The bell above the door chimed as they stepped out. Sarah watched through the window as they walked to their car side by side this time. Not one ahead of the other. Luca's hand came up and rested briefly on his father's shoulder. Marco didn't shake it off. They got in the car. The engine started. The car pulled away from the curb and turned the corner and was gone. The bookshop was quiet. Sarah looked down at the envelope in her hands. Whatever was inside, money. A note. Contact information she wasn't ready to know yet. She slipped it into her jacket pocket, beside the empty envelope that had held her mother's letter. 2 envelopes now, one emptied, one still waiting. "You should eat something." Eleanor's voice came from behind the counter. "Tea and tears don't make a meal." Sarah almost laughed. "I'm not hungry." "Didn't ask if you were hungry. Said you should eat." Eleanor was already moving toward the small kitchen. "I've got bread and butter and some of that strawberry jam Mrs. Henderson brought over last week. Sit tight. Sarah sat. Ember stirred at her feet, lifted his head, then settled back down with a sigh. The bell above the door chimed. Sarah turned, expecting she didn't know what. Marco, coming back for something he'd forgotten. A customer. Anyone. Harold Pemberton stood in the doorway. His tie was still too short, his vest still strained at the buttons. But something in his face was different. The smugness was gone. The self-satisfaction that usually sat on his features like a mask had slipped. And underneath it was something else. Something uncertain. He was holding a paper bag from his pharmacy. His knuckles were white around it. "I saw them leave," he said. His voice was quieter than usual. "The two men, from Connecticut." Sarah said nothing. Her hand moved to her jacket pocket, to the envelope Marco had given her. Harold stepped further into the shop. His eyes moved around the room, the books, the counter, Ember on the floor. They landed on Sarah's face and stayed there. "I came to—" He stopped, started again. "I heard what he said. The older one, when he was leaving." Sarah's throat tightened. "You were listening. I was walking by. I wasn't trying to—" Harold's jaw clenched. "I heard him say you brought his mother back to him, that you—" He trailed off. The silence stretched between them. Harold's hand went to his tie, adjusted it. The gesture was nervous, automatic, the same gesture Sarah had seen him make 100 times when he was about to lecture someone about late prescriptions or incorrect orders, but he wasn't lecturing now. "My mother passed 6 years ago," he said. The words came out stiff, reluctant, like they were being dragged from somewhere deep. "She lived in the nursing home over in Burlington. I visited once a month, sometimes less." Sarah didn't move, didn't speak. "She wrote letters too, in Polish, the language her parents spoke when they came over from the old country." His voice cracked, just slightly. "I never learned it, never saw the point. I threw them away, after she died. Didn't see the use in keeping what I couldn't read." The clock ticked. Ember's tags jingled as he shifted on the floor. Harold looked at the paper bag in his hands like he'd forgotten he was holding it. His fingers trembled slightly as he set it on the nearest table. "This is for you," he said. "Bandages, for your shoes. I noticed this morning that they're—" He stopped. His face reddened. "Just take them." He turned and walked to the door. His hand was on the handle when he paused. "I shouldn't have said what I said. This morning, about the mail being late." He didn't turn around. His voice was rough, the words coming out like they cost him something. "You do a good job. Better than folks notice." The bell chimed. The door closed. Harold was gone. Sarah sat in the chair, staring at the paper bag on the table. Bandages. For her shoes. From the man who had humiliated her on the street 3 hours ago. Eleanor appeared in the kitchen doorway, a plate of bread in her hands. She'd heard everything Sarah could tell by the look on her face. "Well, I'll be," Eleanor said quietly. "If that don't beat all." Sarah reached for the bag. Inside, under the bandages, was something else. A small jar. She pulled it out and read the label. Foot salve. The expensive kind. The kind Harold kept behind the counter and only recommended to his best customers. There was a receipt in the bag, too. Marked "Paid" in Harold's sharp handwriting. Sarah's hand went back to her jacket pocket, to the 2 envelopes resting there, to the letter she'd finally read, and the gift she hadn't yet opened. The morning light had faded into afternoon. Her mail route sat unfinished, her bag still heavy with undelivered letters, but Eleanor was setting the plate of bread on the table beside her, and Ember was warm against her feet. And somewhere outside, Harold Pemberton was walking back to his pharmacy, carrying something heavier than any paper bag. "Eleanor," Sarah said slowly, "why do you always make 2 cups of tea?" Eleanor set the plate down and looked at Sarah for a long moment. "You noticed that, did you? 2 slices of lemon this morning. 2 cups every time I've been here. Sarah's fingers traced the edge of the bread plate. Even when you're alone. Eleanor pulled out the chair across from Sarah and sat down heavily. Her joints creaked the sound of 72 years of use. She reached for a slice of bread and buttered it slowly, methodically, like she was buying time. My husband passed 23 years ago, she said. Heart attack. Quick, at least. He was in the garden, tying up the tomato plants. I found him there when I came home from the shop. Sarah's chest tightened. For the first year, I kept forgetting he was gone. I'd set the table for 2, pour 2 cups of coffee, call out to ask if he wanted sugar in his tea. Eleanor's knife scraped against the bread. Then I'd remember, and it would hit me all over again, like losing him fresh each time. Ember had lifted his head from his spot on the floor. His tail thumped once against the wood. So I stopped forgetting on purpose. Eleanor said. I started setting 2 cups every morning, 2 slices of lemon, 2 chairs on the porch. She looked up at Sarah. Not because I thought he was coming back, but because setting one felt like giving up on something I couldn't name. The clock ticked. The afternoon light slanted through the window, catching the dust floating in the air. And then, Sarah asked, and then nothing. I just kept doing it. Year after year. It stopped being about him. After a while, c'était qui. It became about... Eleanor paused, searching for words. About leaving a space, in case someone needed it. Sarah looked at the empty chair beside her. At the second teacup Eleanor had set on the table without being asked. Someone like me, she said quietly. Eleanor didn't answer. She just pushed the plate of bread closer to Sarah and picked up her own cup of tea. They ate in silence. The bread was fresh, the butter soft, the jam sweet with the taste of summer strawberries. Sarah hadn't realized how hungry she was until she started eating. The last thing she'd had was Mrs. Dorothy's peppermint, and that felt like a lifetime ago. The afternoon stretched toward evening. Sarah should have finished her route. The mailbag sat by the door. Still half full, but she couldn't make herself move. Eleanor didn't push. She just puttered around the shop, straightening books, dusting shelves, letting Sarah sit. At some point, Eleanor pulled a box from under the counter. Old stamps, hundreds of them, loose in a wooden container that smelled like cedar and something sweeter underneath. Help me with these. Sarah moved to the counter. Eleanor handed her a damp sponge and a stack of envelopes. They worked side by side. The rhythm was simple: wet the stamp, press it down, smooth the edges, no talking required. Just the soft sound of paper against paper, the occasional creak of the floorboards, the tick of the clock on the wall. Ember had relocated to his bed in the corner. His breathing was slow and steady, his paws twitching occasionally as he dreamed of whatever old dogs dream about. Eleanor pushed a tin toward Sarah. Inside were butter cookies, the kind with the little holes pressed into the top, the kind Sarah's grandmother used to make at Christmas. Sarah took one. It was dry and crumbly and tasted like something she'd forgotten she remembered. She smiled. Her first real smile since the morning. Eleanor saw it, didn't comment, just pushed the tin a little closer. The next morning came gray and cold. Sarah woke in her apartment, a small place above the hardware store. One room with a hot plate and a bed that sagged in the middle. She'd lived there for 6 years, had never bothered to decorate. The walls were bare except for a calendar from 3 years back that she'd never taken down. She got dressed in the dark. Same routine as always, same worn jeans, same jacket, same shoes with the twine laces. But the bandages Harold had given her were on her nightstand. She'd put them there last night without really thinking about it. She picked them up, turned them over in her hands. Then she sat on the edge of her bed and wrapped her shoes. Carefully. Properly. The way the instructions said to do it. It took 10 minutes. When she was done, her feet looked strange bulky, Obvious. Like someone had tried to patch something that should have been replaced years ago. But when she stood up and took a step, the sharp pain she'd learned to ignore was gone. She walked to work. The mailbag was waiting for her at the post office. Heavier than usual after yesterday's missed route, she slung it over her shoulder and stepped out into the morning. Her feet carried her down Main Street, past the hardware store, past the church with its white steeple, past the pharmacy where Harold's lights were already on. She didn't look in. Didn't want to make it into something it wasn't, but as she passed, the door opened. Harold stood in the entrance, a cup of coffee in his hand. He saw her. She saw him. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Harold nodded. Just once, a small dip of his chin, quick and awkward, like he wasn't quite sure how to do it, and stepped back inside. Sarah kept walking. Her heart was beating faster than it should have been. She didn't know what to make of it, the nod, the bandages, the moment yesterday when he'd almost said something that sounded like sorry. But she didn't have time to figure it out. The mail wasn't going to deliver itself. She turned the corner onto Eleanor's Street. The bookshop was closed too early for customers, but the porch light was on. And there, on the top step, sat 2 cups of tea, steam rising in the cold air. Sarah stopped. Eleanor was inside. She could see her through the window, moving around with a dust cloth, talking to the books the way she always did. The radio was playing faint, scratchy. An old song Sarah half recognized. Patsy Cline, maybe. Something about falling to pieces. The second cup sat on the step, waiting. Sarah looked at her mailbag, at the route ahead of her 9 miles of porches and mailboxes and folks who wouldn't look up. At the sky, which was starting to lighten from gray to pale gold. She climbed the steps. The chair beside the tea was wooden, old, the paint peeling in places. It creaked when she sat down. The door opened. Eleanor stepped out, her own cup in her hand. She was wearing a cardigan that had seen better days, the elbows worn thin. "You're early," she said. "Couldn't sleep." Eleanor sat in the other chair, didn't ask questions, didn't make small talk, just sat there, hands wrapped around her cup, watching the street wake up. The radio drifted out through the screen door. Patsy had finished. And now, it was someone else, a man's voice, deep and gentle, singing about a Tennessee waltz. "I should go," Sarah said. "The mail, the letters'll wait." Eleanor took a sip of her tea. "They always do." Sarah's hand moved to her jacket pocket, to the envelope Marco had given her. She still hadn't opened it. Wasn't sure when she would, but it was there. Waiting, like everything else. Down the street, a car engine turned over, a dog barked. Someone called out a name, Tommy Breakfast, and a screen door slammed shut. The town was waking up, the same way it always did. The same sounds, the same rhythms, the same folks going about their ordinary lives, but something had shifted. Sarah could feel it, in the way the tea warmed her hands, in the way the chair fit her body, in the way Eleanor sat beside her, not saying anything, not needing to. Harold Pemberton walked past on the other side of the street. He was carrying a paper bag pills for old Mrs. Hawkins, probably his shoulders hunched against the cold. He glanced over, saw them sitting there. Sarah tensed, waited for the comment, the sneer, the reminder that she was late, that the mail was waiting, that some folks had real jobs to do. Harold raised his hand, a small wave, awkward, like he wasn't sure he was doing it right. Then he turned the corner and was gone. Eleanor took another sip of tea. "Well, I'll be," she said quietly. "Wonders never cease." Sarah laughed. It came out surprised, almost startled, a sound she hadn't heard from herself in a long time. Ember appeared in the doorway. He stood there for a moment, nose twitching, then padded over and lay down at Sarah's feet. His tail thumped twice against the wooden porch. Inside the bookshop, the kettle started to whistle. Eleanor didn't move to get it. Neither did Sarah. They just sat there. Two women on a porch in a small town where nothing ever happened, watching the morning light spill down the street and pool in the cracks of the sidewalk. The kettle kept whistling. The radio kept playing. Ember kept breathing, slow and steady, against Sarah's ankles, and the mail, for once, could wait. There's a quiet that settles after a story like this one. Not empty quiet, the kind that sits heavy in your chest, familiar somehow, like something you've carried before but never quite named. Many of us know what it feels like to hold something too long. A letter, a word we meant to say, a chair we keep setting at the table even when no one's coming. Some of us have walked past folks every day without really seeing them, or been the one who was never seen. Some of us have learned that the smallest kindness, offered without expectation, can change the shape of a whole afternoon, a whole life, maybe. You don't have to understand everything you just heard. You don't have to find a meaning or tie it up with a bow. Some things are allowed to stay unfinished. Some feelings are allowed to rest exactly where they are, like an old dog at your feet who doesn't need anything but to be close. If any part of this story felt familiar, that's enough. If it stirred something you haven't thought about in a while, that's enough too. Thank you for sitting with me through this one. Thank you for staying until the kettle whistled and the tea got cold.